I will now call to order the Wednesday, September 3, 2014 meeting of the Metro Vision Issues Committee of the Denver Regional Council of Governments here at 1290 Broadway in the first floor boardroom. And I am advised that we have more than sufficient in attendance for our meeting to be valid. And having called the meeting to order, the first item on our agenda is public comment. And we now offer the opportunity for any member of the public who would like to address the MVIC on any matter of interest, provided, however, that there be no public comment on issues for which a prior public hearing has been held before the Board of Directors. So we invite anyone who is so interested to approach the microphone. Seeing no one, we move on to agenda item number 3, the summary of the August 6th, 2014 meeting. That's attachment A in your materials. And let me emphasize that the computer glitch that we suffered was just that, a computer glitch. It was no problem due to staff. There was a server problem. That's right. Actually, it was the chair's fault, the chair of DRCOG, I mean, not the chair of MVIC. And we were trying to cover for her, but she chose to speak out, so without being recognized. So needless to say, we will point out the actual blame lies at her feet. The minutes, or I shouldn't say minutes, the summary is attached for your information only. There is no formal action that is required on the summary of the August 6th meeting. We now then turn to our action items, and the first one that we have is the consideration of a motion to recommend to the full board the second phase project selection criteria for development of the 2016-2021 Transportation Improvement Program. You'll find those materials at attachment B. For those of you who have your computers with access and you downloaded, you can refer to that. We also have numerous extra paper copies for anyone. So if you need a paper copy, please indicate if we can send one down to Tim and also to Bill. And any others. Yeah, just why don't we send a few around. A couple down to Ashley as well? Absolutely, we have you covered. Let me just give you a very brief background on this, and then we will turn it over to Doug Rex from the staff to speak with us relative to this matter. You will recall that we have been engaged in the TIP process, setting things up for the 2016-2021 program for some period of time now. And you've heard about the first phase, and we spent a great deal of time going through the specific scoring elements associated with the first phase. There will also be, again, I'm sure Doug will refresh our recollection on the second phase and the fact that there will be additional funding left over, and we have the opportunity as MVIC at this time essentially to deal with this as a blank slate and to say what are the considerations that we want to make sure are considered for this second pass in the second phase. And staff has worked diligently under the direction of MVIC, because we did have a discussion about this at the last meeting as well, and also had some direction to staff relative to additional information that we would like to have in going through this second phase analysis. That information has been provided to you, and today the goal is to talk about what are the various criteria that we would like to suggest to the full board. Recognize we don't make the final decision here. We tee this matter up for the full board to address and then to make the final decision. But the board does have great respect and regard, obviously, for how MVIC has viewed the matter. With that somewhat long-winded introduction, I'm now pleased to introduce at the podium Doug Rex, who will lead us through the information that you have in your packets. Good afternoon, Mr. Rex.
Thank you, sir, very much. There we go. Thank you very much. Appreciate it. And that was a good summary of where we have been and where we're headed with regards to second phase. And again, I would like to apologize for the IT glitch we had. I know that it did cause some consternation with getting with staff and having a discussion about this. So let's just see how far we go with this today. And I know we have a full 2 hours for our discussion. This is the only item. Jackie's saying no, we don't. But let's just see how far we can get with it today. As the chairman suggested, we are going to have an elaborate discussion about second phase selection. And just to refresh everybody's memory, we do select our TIP projects in 2 phases. The first phase, 75% of the monies is allocated based on the point scoring of the projects that are submitted. The remaining 25% of yet-to-be program funds is allocated in second phase. And the board has more discretion about how and where they would like to place those funds. So at the last meeting, we initiated that discussion about second phase. And there was, I believe, correct me if I'm wrong, consensus reached at that meeting to retain 3 of the 5 criteria that was used last time in the TIP selection in second phase, and that would be project score, financial equity, and we'll have a larger discussion about that, no doubt, as we go forth today, and a criteria related to very small communities. Also, what was discussed were other suggestions for criteria that you all suggested at the MVIC meeting that you would like staff to consider in their recommendation and provide you with additional detail. I'll let you know now that we really struggled with this assignment because, quite frankly, there was merit to every single one of the items that are listed on that screen. But as it was suggested towards the end of the last meeting, we wanted to try to keep this as well. We didn't want it to be unwieldy. We wanted to be able to limit this to a number of criteria, which we believe would add additional value to the criteria that may be already accounted for in phase 1. So these. I don't know if we have these described in the agenda packet. I don't know if it's necessary to walk through these individually, but if we did not describe the suggested criteria accurately, please just shout it out and let us correct that. Yeah, Mayor. I'm sorry.
I'll recognize him. I'll recognize the mayor at an appropriate moment. I was hoping that we might actually be able to have Doug sort of finish his presentation first, and then we might have comments.
He said something about shouting out.
Okay,
I was trying to be a little more polite than that.
That was a slip of the Canadian tongue. You'll have to forgive him.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So. Again, we really did believe, and I'm being sincere in that there was merit to every single one of them. And quite frankly, there's reasons why some of those should be on here, maybe not others. But what we decided to do, we used these guiding principles, and we met a few times over the 3-week period to discuss which ones we believe should be included in our recommendation. And we kind of pared it down to these guiding principles. We wanted, first of all, to help simplify and maybe even streamline the selection process, which has been an overlying goal for this whole TIP selection policy criteria. And we also asked if it was redundant, if it had been covered already in first phase or to an acceptable level, was it necessary to also include it into second phase? And third, but certainly not least, is does it provide additional value? Is there added value to including this in the discussion for second phase criteria? And I just want to point out again that, in second phase, it is different than first phase in that these criteria that we're referring to, they're attributes for your consideration. We don't score projects in second phase, but we just want to have provide additional attributes that you can see the broad spectrum for that project in helping you reach your final determination. So here we go, staff's recommendation. And again, this is detailed in your packet. Staff, as we suggested, are including the 3 that were included last time, which is TIP score, very small communities, and the funding equity status, which we'll talk about in greater detail in a minute. The other additional ones that we felt had significant merit and added value were projects not eligible in first phase. So we're looking at, there's two categories, two project types in the TIP criteria that are not eligible for first phase, and those are studies, and that runs the gamut of transportation studies from, really, environmental studies. What other kind of studies are we talking about? Transit studies, any kind of operational capacity studies, roadway interchanges, those types of things. So it's a number of projects, and they're not scored in first phase. And the other is in other enhancements. And those projects are specifically listed in the policy document as those like transportation aesthetics and have scenic value, historic preservation projects, and environmental mitigation projects, particularly related to water pollution and wildlife mortality. There was one project that was selected last time, and that was a streetscape project in Lyons. You may recall, those who've been on the board for a little bit, that that project it had a match issue, and Boulder County helped and assisted with that match. We brought it back to the board a few months ago. So that's the type of projects that we're talking about with regards to projects not eligible. We felt that had added value because they obviously weren't eligible. We should at least highlight that in your consideration for second phase. Multi-jurisdictional projects. These are projects that cross jurisdictional boundaries, geographically cover they cross jurisdictional boundaries within our region. And the fifth one that's listed there is number of sponsored projects selected in first phase. We thought this also had value in the event that you felt that communities that did not receive any projects in first phase for whatever reason would be considered for selection in second phase. And not only communities that did not have projects in first phase, but maybe they, larger communities maybe only receive one project, for example. So it kind of runs the gamut. And here we go, county funding equity. Staff was asked as part of our research to come back to you with two expenditure scenarios to look at when we're looking at this financial equity. And I'd like for you to consider this financial equity. Those who've been on the board for a while have heard this term mentioned several times through, certainly if you've been through the last TIP cycle, you're very familiar with this. But it's a return on investment. It's basically we're looking at the investment that has been provided in your community based on program projects from DRCOG and or CDOT and RTD. And then we compare that against the so-called contributions that you provide to that side of the formula. And we'll talk about that here in a minute. So we were asked to provide two scenarios for your consideration. One showing the expenditures in groups with DRCOG, CDOT, and RTD, and another one just showing DRCOG only. And staff's recommendation is to include the expenditures from DRCOG, CDOT, and RTD. We did believe that it just provided a better overall representation of the investment within the community. Again, there's pros and cons, yeses and nos to both of these, so there's no right or wrong answer. And the contributions that we recommended are listed on the screen. Are population and employment, VMT, State Highway Users Trust Fund disbursement to counties, and RTD net taxable retail sales. And the RTD net taxable retail sales is, in our recommendation, is only to be included if ultimately you all decide to include on the expenditure side RTD. If you decide to go with just DRCOG on the expenditure side, is our recommendation to remove the RTD. And it gets back to that symmetry concept that Robin Kanish brought up last time, that there was some concern that that there wasn't a yin and a yang on both sides of the equation. Let me see. Let me just also point out on the contribution side that with those 5 that we listed, we felt we had a very comprehensive list of variables. Based on it, we know the population, so we know where people are living. Employment, we know where they're working. VMT, we know where they're traveling. And then the other 2, we know where the money's coming from. So we felt that there was a very very strong and real comprehensive reason for including all 5, and it also had the ability to smooth out any outliers that may exist with one of these variables in any one community, any one county or what have you. So with all that said, what I'd like to do now is to turn to the tables that reference this financial equity.
And Doug, if
yes,
I
sir.
may, just before you get into the tables themselves, this is a natural break point. So, Mayor Cernanek, did you have a comment that you wanted to share with us in your shout-out?
Well, it was when Mr. Dunn made the comment about items not yet considered or not considered specifically or left off. I wanted to take a step back, and particularly with regard to the one that talks about the project's relationship to the MetroVision goals. In teeing us up for future discussions, I thought it would have been a good exercise maybe to have said, how it might look if we went more directly, possibly getting to something that would be simpler in the context of that, and also a bit of a back look at MetroVision goals, possibly in context of other items coming like MAP 21. I'm just going to go back to the first sentence that's there, which is staff believes a project's relationship to MetroVision's goals is adequately addressed in the first phase scoring criteria. And I was going to ask Mr. Dunn maybe if he could elaborate on the staff's thinking in coming to that belief position.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And it is simply our opinion with regards to this, as you all know. But yeah, when we looked at the MetroVision criteria and isolating it as a second phase criteria, it forced us to add some perspective and look back at first phase to make sure that we appropriately addressed MetroVision criteria. And we did believe we did that. If you look at all the different project types that are in first phase, each and every one of them, there are elements within their selection criteria that address specifically MetroVision goals and or policies. And we have those listed within the description of that within your packet. It is also worthy of pointing out that 25% of the actual scoring in first phase is dedicated specifically to the tenets of MetroVision. Whether it's directed specifically to the project or to what the community is doing to meet those tenets. So we felt it was adequately addressed. However, I mean, if the wishes of the committee is to include that in some degree, we'd be happy to do that.
All right, thank you. And recognize that what we're really doing in the first instance is just sort of setting the table, and then we'll come back, because you will note that staff has come up with 6 non-prioritized, simply 6 bullet points. They're numbered 1 through 6, but you might as well call them A through F or just bullet points. So none of them is given any particular priority relative to a ranking system. And we want to just get them all on the table, but we're taking a little extra time talking about this financial equity one because there was a question and we have a lot of data to address. So we'll get further into those comments as Mayor Cernanek raised, I think, in a bit. Then I had Chris Nevitt next, so Councilor.
Thank you. I hope we'll return to the financial equity stuff because I think that's a longer conversation, so I'm sort of mentally bracketing that aside. But the one question for clarification and then a question on the criteria that you rejected or that you suggested we not use. So all these criteria for second phase consideration, the proposition here is not to figure out some way to rank projects according to these different criteria and then put them in a table so that we can sort of choose which ones. These are different dimensions on which all the remaining projects, proposed projects, could be judged, could be assessed. And when we get to the second phase, you'll be offering us, or you'll be doing the analysis and giving us the lists. Here's how these projects not score, but here's how these projects stack up from an equity perspective. Here's how these projects stack up from a small community perspective. Here's how these projects stack up to, you know, and so it's still very fluid, still very open. Which dimensions we prioritize remain up in the air. You're simply saying you want a narrow set of criteria on which to offer us detailed analysis of these projects.
Correct.
Did I understand that correctly?
Yeah, exactly. And what I have up here on the screen is this is an example of what the summary table might look like that you all will receive in January when you guys consider second phase. And you'll see we have it, we'll have it grouped by project type, and the number of projects that did not make it in first phase will all be listed here. And then, we'll have the TIP score. Is it a very small community? Yes.
Got it.
Is it under equity? Yes. So we'll have all those with check marks, so you'll see which ones. And it's just for your information to make your own determination about which project you think
So
are
I had a
valuable.
question. That was a clarification.
Please, go on ahead.
And the specific question was, one of the things you suggested we not use was the first mile, last mile connection. And I'm not here to say in the fairly short time frame we've got, by God, you should include first mile, last mile. But I think it is very important. I mean, insofar as part of our enterprise is to get people out of their cars and using other forms of transportation, the first mile, last mile is really key. We can build a whole system, but if they can't get to it or get home, it's not going to do us a whole hell of a lot of good. So I would say it's important, and one of the rationales you gave here is it may be difficult to clearly define which projects are or are not last mile. I would say I think that's not a reason not to do it. I think that's a challenge we need to overcome. I think we should figure out how to define first mile, last mile, so we can be a little smarter about it. There you go.
I'm going to recognize Elise first, and then Jackie, and then I'll make a comment as well. Elise?
Well, I wanted to follow up on both Chris and Phil's comments about sort of MetroVision goals. I do think that makes sense to always be going back to what it is we're trying to accomplish. And would note, in the last tip cycle, we highlighted a MetroVision goal that folks at that time, I wasn't here, obviously felt was important, and that was greenhouse gas reduction. And obviously we're not measuring that anymore, so we can't hold that up, but it remains a MetroVision goal. And I guess I would like to revisit the staff's suggestion about dropping first and last mile under the consideration of the MetroVision goals that it supports, not only the greenhouse gas reduction goal, but also decrease in VMT and decrease in SOV, all are pretty key MetroVision goals. I tend to agree with Chris that we can figure out a measurement should we want to do first and last mile. I don't know if now is the time to have that full discussion, but I wanted to flag that that's a discussion that I think that I would like to have if other folks were interested in doing that whenever the appropriate time is. Mr. Chair?
Now Jackie?
And I completely agree with the comments that MetroVision goals are very important. That's kind of why we're sitting here. That's why the TIP criteria were established in the first place, was to achieve those goals. And I think the point was made in this document by staff that really has been taken into consideration in the first phase of funding, and 75% of the money has been kind of divvied up in the pool already based on MetroVision goals, and one of which, the first and last mile connection, it has been included in that, along with VMT and all of these other things. So to me, the second phase pot is really a different pool of money, and what we have been asked to do is what are the things that we think are important in the distribution of that second phase of money, and what are the things that we value and that we don't think get fair representation in the first phase selection. And by fair representation, I really do believe the small communities is a terrific example of that. Those communities really can't necessarily compete at the same level, and because they can't, but they still have very worthwhile projects in their communities, we need to make sure that they're given consideration. And if we're just going to go back and use the same tip criteria again in second phase, I don't really see the point of having a second phase of projects.
And before I speak, let me recognize Councilor Tim Mock. That's like when we had, at the first meeting that the Jones sisters came, they sat next to each other deliberately. I know. All right.
So I think
Sorry.
Tim sat down right next to me to make it hard for you, Doug. And we've succeeded. So we feel pretty good about that, right, Tim? Okay.
We have that same problem in Arapahoe County. We have 3 Nancys.
So I wanted to follow up on what Chris was saying, and also Elise with regard to the first and the final mile. I think that's an important piece to have in there. And for a couple of reasons. I mean, we saw last time, I think, that there really is a high demand for bike ped projects, and I think that putting emphasis on the first and final mile will help to address that. And also, we can really leverage, I think, our regional investment in transit by doing the first and final mile. And so I think that's a really important piece for us to consider and have in here as we go forward.
Thank you. And I'll recognize Kathy and Mayor Noon in just a minute. Let me just point out an observation, and I want to go back to this to make sure that we have a sense of consensus here. And that is, relative to these additional factors, whether it be 5, 6, or 7 factors, it is, and I hate to use the word equity because we've used it so many times in this memo, but it is a sort of gut equity assessment that we are looking at in the second phase. The intention is to say we used an artificial, admittedly artificial because we constructed it, an artificial scoring process to say these are the various policies that we are trying to implement by approving these projects. We recognize that when you follow that, at the end of the day, you look at something and say, how did that not make the list? I mean, this is a very good project. We know this should be a part of it, and that's one of the reasons for this second phase, is to provide that ultimate equalization, ultimate gut equity. That's why these are not ranked, and you'll notice up on the board that what we're talking about for second phase criteria is pretty much more of a check mark than anything else. Do they meet this one or do they not? And I have a sense so far from what I've heard that there is consensus amongst the group, and from our prior discussions, consensus amongst the group that, yeah, we're not trying to create scoring or ranking based upon these factors, but rather simply an enumeration of factors to take into account. And then secondly, the issue is, do we feel that one factor or 2 that have not been included should be included? And we can focus on that discussion in a second. But before we get to that, I'd like to just make sure that we don't have any questions about, and I'm sure we do, and I'm being pejorative when I say that, and I apologize. I want to make sure that relative to these tables, this 1A, 1B, 2A, 2B, that there isn't any confusion on the part of people, and Doug explained that. Doug Rex explained what the tables are. If you have questions about them, we can go over those and we can deal with that, just so you understand how we're addressing this, if you will, county funding equity status issue, and making sure you understand that. And then I think we can focus into a more detailed discussion relative to, okay, are these 6 factors okay? Do we want to add one? Do we want to take one away? That's my view of how our discussion may most productively proceed. But before I ask Doug to respond to any questions that might arise about this equity table. Let me recognize Mayor Noon, who had her hand up.
I think George from Castle Rock may have been first. So I'll yield to you if you'd like to go, and then I'll go. Did you miss him?
And if you're yielding, and I'm sorry, George, I didn't see your hand up, so I apologize. So we'll go to Councilor Teal first.
Okay, cool. Well, I was going to speak in support of Jackie's point about the tip points, and understanding based upon your comments just now, Doug, this is a little ahead of the power curve, or a little ahead of the process. But no, I fully endorse what she was saying, just because it strikes me, when we saw the worksheet that was up there previously, seeing those tip points again, it wasn't helpful for me. It's just not, it feels like we're regurgitating, we're going over the same road, whereas then we have another column there that gives us projects ineligible in the first phase. So, I mean, I would encourage us to actually drop the tip score points. And that's kind of the point that I was hoping to speak in support of. And then I'll have additional comments, Doug, once you point out, once we see the bigger picture.
Thank you. I appreciate that, George, because I think that's right. Let's try to focus on bite-sized pieces, then we can have a broader discussion. But Mayor Noon?
So I think the way that when I look at this, because I would agree with the staff recommendation, is that I do believe the bike ped and some of the others that they left off were addressed in the first round, which is a reason to then leave the first tip score on, because that would then show you how it scored against more Metro Vision goals. But to have that score and then do it again, and what I think you're going to have an issue with is your very small communities and your equity is going to get out of balance again, because very small communities, first and last mile, how many people have a light rail? How many, I mean, I think that was the discussion before, was we were really focused on the first and last half mile from light rail. That eliminates so many communities from getting scoring. And then if you're taking the county equity, that will go right into it again. So if you already don't have light rail, you're not going to get first and half mile. Their equity is going to change. So I do think that we have adequately looked at a lot of the MetroVision things in the first round. That would be reflected in your tip score, and not that you would rake it on that. But in your mind, you say, okay, in the full MetroVision theme of things, this is how it came out. However, we do realize there are some communities that will never get money if we don't look outside those vision goals. And if we're going to double give, credit to some of those goals, our equity will never get any closer than it is. And when I analyzed the table, when you look at RTD, CDOT, and RTD versus the one without, it's very clear who has RTD service and who doesn't. The equity issue changes quite a bit when you take that into account. So that's kind of reinforced to me, if I read this all correctly, but when I was trying to analyze it, just looking at areas that may have more RTD funding, when you look at those equity ratios compared to others, it was very different.
Thank you. And if I may, let me just make sure that we are all comfortable with these tables. Are there any members who have questions about the tables specifically? Because I want to make sure that we understand what that is. Recognize it's sort of, in some respects, because we've got 4 pages just on that, it highlights one factor out of the 6 factors that have been listed and gives it a lot of attention. But I think it's because we asked that specific question at the last MVIC meeting about show us how the funding works and who's actually being highly benefited and who is not being as highly benefited. So if I can, I'm going to solicit questions, and I have Mayor Atchison, then I'll recognize Herb in just a minute. But if you have questions about the table, let us know, because I think Doug can address that. Then we can have the broader discussion about the overall factors that we're addressing here. So I'll ask Herb to speak, and then I'll recognize Chris Nevitt after that, and we'll get to you, Counselor, in a second. Herb.
Just a clarification, on tables 1A and 2A, we marked the next to the last column as southwest weld. In the other two, we call it weld. Is there really a difference, or is this just a type issue?
Yes, I mean, both should refer to Southwest Well, because that's the area that's contained within the DRCOG
That's
region.
why I'm asking for the clarification, because
Indeed.
I'm looking at two sheets thinking, well, you're looking at the entire county, and the other two sheets, you're looking at a piece of the county.
Right, no, I apologize. It
So
should be
it is
Southwest Well.
full Southwest County on all four sheets.
Correct,
Thank you.
correct. Yes, indeed, good catch.
Counselor Nevitt.
Before we dig into those tables, I just wanted to get closure on the first mile, last mile question. So, Mayor Nancy over here, I think we could actually get to the same place about the value of a first mile, last mile, and these are more innovative projects. But we can have that argument. But is there direction to the staff with respect to figuring out how to measure or how to define first mile, last mile projects? I mean, do we want to try to give any direction to staff? Because I think these are the projects that are probably may have a big impact on transportation, but also are more likely to be the most innovative. I mean, Lone Tree is doing some really interesting first mile, last mile stuff. I don't know how
We're getting nothing for it.
exactly how it scores, but it's really interesting and valuable work. I don't know. I'm making a pitch to have staff go back and take a crack at defining first mile, last mile, so we could include it in the consideration. Of course, it's in the consideration with a whole bunch of other factors, but I'm thinking it ought to be something that we can measure, can judge, and then make our own judgments when we get there.
Yeah, and I think that's a discussion, obviously, that the group wants to have, and I will be happy to entertain that if we can first just make sure, because I know Doug is teed up and ready to answer questions that you may have about the tables. So let's just, if I can, just to make sure, and then we can just open up to this broad discussion on the issues. But are there specific questions on the tables? And it looks like I have Commissioner Rozier and Commissioner Jones. I'll recognize Commissioner Rozier first.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Doug, quick on the table, down where it says RTD daily boardings.
Yes, sir.
Date on there? As far as, is it 2013, 2012? Because when I look at this data, sorry, the engineer in me is coming out. I hate comparing multi-year data to each other.
Right.
Because to me, it's picking and choosing. 1 year may be good here, 1 year bad there. So we have 2010 population, but then we go up to HUTF of 2012. Then we're also factoring in RTD taxable retail sales of 2013. We have 3-4 years worth of data. A lot happens in 3 to 4 years, and we're trying to mush it all together in one chart. To me, that's, if it doesn't all come from 1 year from the same source, we could be comparing apples to oranges, or as I say lately, oranges to tangerines. They look close, but it's not a close comparison.
Right. It's a legitimate concern, and we talked about that internally. Now, what you see here is really the most, it's the most, well, the most recent data we have, particularly with the net taxable sales, RTD taxable retail sales, and the RTD boardings. It's the most recent data they had. Now, the problem with trying to come up with just 1 year to supply that data with, we can't get it for sometimes within that year. So, for example, like the VMT estimate and what have you, they're model generated. So that came directly from our model. They're estimates, like most things, but VMT is always an estimate. But you know, it's validated based on traffic counts that are out there. But the only thing I can suggest that the information that's provided is the most recently available. Now, I will say though that if this eases your mind at all, that that even though it is in different years that data is provided, it's applied the same across the county boundaries. So regardless of the employment is 2010, we're looking at 2010 across for each county. You know what I mean? So, I know it's not perfect.
Follow-up?
RTD?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. The date for the RTD daily boardings, in the reason I'm going to hit on this is because when the W line opened, they cut a lot of our bus service. So depending on that date, it could greatly affect the number.
Right, and we'll check that. We believe it's 2013, the full calendar year 2013.
Okay, thank you.
And I'll recognize Elise, and then I'm going to come back to Mayor Pro Tem Malay because she had her hand up, but I wanted to make sure we got questions about the tables first. So Mr. Jones.
Mr. Chair, kind of cheating here. I have a question. It's not about the table. It's about the definition associated with the very small communities. Is that acceptable to ask that now? In the August 6th memo, you talk about projects in very small communities. And in this memo, you talk about projects submitted by small communities. And it would be nice to get clarification. And as a county who often works with our very small communities to help them with submittals, for our purposes, to enable us to do that, like, for example, Lions, it would be better if it were the projects located in the small community and the small community benefits, not whether or not they're the sponsor or not, if that makes sense.
Yeah,
but anyway, it would be helpful to have that clarified.
Yeah, it is location.
Okay,
yeah,
so that we can tighten that up.
Indeed, yeah.
Okay, great.
So this, yeah, as suggested in this memo is incorrect then. It should be located within.
All right. Any other, you can ask more questions about the tables later, but I just wanted to focus that discussion right now. Are there any other immediate questions on the tables? Otherwise, we'll open up to the broader discussion. Seeing none, then we'll go back to, a question on the table.
Yes, sir.
Councilor Nevitt, Chris.
You assumed I didn't have a question on the table, didn't you? On table 1B, which is the total, I wonder if I'm looking at the right table. No, it's the calculation of how much was spent in each county from CDOT, DRCOG, RTD.
Correct.
This is kind of similar to Roger's question. What's the time frame, and is the time frame consistent? So, how far back do we want to go? Is that going to be a rolling window? Are we going to sort of leave the beginning point stuck and keep adding money on the other? I mean, I'm unclear on how the calculation of how much money was spent on transportation is calculated. What we're counting.
Sure. Well, I mean, I can tell you how it's calculated in the table. It refers to basically everything from 2003 to present day, and everything that's currently programmed in our current tip, which is we're through 2015.
So it's 2003 to 2015.
Correct.
What's it going to be in the next tip cycle?
It will be, well, if we don't know, but we propose. I mean, are you talking beyond the 2016-21 tip?
Yeah, you're setting up a system here.
Right. I mean, yeah. I mean, I think it would be our recommendation to keep that anchored 2003 and just use all the investment. But that's just staff's recommendation. You guys can choose to go a different route, certainly.
Because, I mean, we'll end up having a discussion here, and our discussion will be informed both by the sort of narrow interests we might have in having a counting system that benefits our jurisdiction, but then we'll also be having a larger discussion about what the right measurement is. I'd say that as preamble to this is a parochial concern, but T-Rex was frickin' expensive. And if you leave that in the calculation as we continue out into the future, we will be way over equity for eternity because of T-Rex. Even as T-Rex recedes into the past, we'll continue being dinged for it. And I-70 will come up, and, you know, I don't mind being dinged for I-70, but you know what I'm saying? I
Right,
mean,
yeah, I
it seems
do.
like it ought to be a rolling window
Yeah.
of expenditures, that at some point you're not being held accountable for expenditures that took place in your community, you know, back in the Lamb administration.
Right, if you want like just an 8-year rolling or 10 years, something, whatever it is.
I would say some kind of rolling number, and maybe it goes in chunks, you know, 2 tip cycles, 2 chunks.
And that's an interesting and I think valid comment, and I'll recognize Jackie in a second. If you look at the...
I keep saying that. I know.
I love
The only
seeing
one
it
no-
afterwards.
Am I the only one noticing this?
Are you taking notes?
If you look at, that's right, yeah. If you look at Broomfield, for example, you see the tremendous disparity there, and that's simply one thing, US 36. That's what it is.
So
Jackie.
this is directly related. This is exactly why I actually don't think we should be including all of the transportation expenditures. I actually disagree with staff's recommendation on this, and I think we should only be looking at tip dollars. And I think that is a point of information that I would like to know, but I don't think we should be basing equity on it, because these projects, that the T-Rex project didn't just serve Denver. The I-70 project is not going to just serve Denver. The US 36 project did not just serve Broomfield. And, you know, the lane balancing project, which is teeny tiny, but it is not just serving Lone Tree. These are large regional freeways, and I think Chris's point about keeping these rolling, you know, historic perspectives on things that happened that benefited our entire region, not just Denver. I think it really throws and skews our numbers. We are here at DRCOG. We only have control over the DRCOG dollars, and that's what we should be talking about. I think it's interesting to note, and I would say, staff, please let me know collectively what is spent in these communities, but that should not be the basis of DRCOG's decision making. We should be deciding on projects based on our TRIP criteria, which reflects our Metro Vision goals. So DRCOG dollars only.
And if I may, as I understand it, what that is a word in favor of using Table 2B as the calculator for this second phase factor rather than Table 1B, because if you look in the upper left corner of Tables 1B and 2B, the difference is Table 1B takes into account DRCOG, CDOT, and RTD, if you will, the 3 pots. And Table 2B just looks at the DRCOG expenditures, and Jackie is suggesting that we should just look at the DRCOG expenditures. I'll recognize Phil and then George.
Okay. Just a quick question on 2B, which gets to the ratios. You talked about the staff approach, which if we only looked at the DRCOG expenditures, we would only look at the contributions in parallel of that RTD would be taken out.
Correct.
So is that true of 2A as well?
Yes, 2A, I have it up here on the screen right now, does not include the RTD component.
Okay. So even though it shows up on the page, because it has considerations.
It's included in the bottom. Those are other things we reviewed,
Right.
but it's not included.
I just wanted to make sure that the ratio's there, so
Yes.
we know we're looking at whatever it is, persimmons and persimmons on that. And then the second piece is I agree with Councilmember Millay, President-elect, whatever title we want to use.
Pick one. There's so many.
Queen of Lone Tree.
Just don't call me Mom.
Okay.
Call her Nancy. Don't call me Mom.
Call her Nancy. It'll be
Nancy.
easier.
I have dark hair, thank you.
Nancy from Lone Tree.
And George. And then Jackie after George.
Yeah, I've heard that before.
Actually, unfortunately, I should have passed that note to Phil saying what I was going to say, because he said it. But yeah, that's my big concern with the difference. That's really the reason why I would support the 2B criteria, just because, again, Castle Rock's not an RTD community. I know there are other communities here in in DRCOG that are also not RTD communities. And so, I mean, I look at the other tables, it just seems like we are automatically at a disadvantage, not just Castle Rock, but all those who are not involved in RTD. So I would encourage us to go with Table 2B also.
I was going to recognize Jackie, but I
Yeah,
no,
but,
all
but
right.
something else
Jackie.
came up. But something else came up. I actually just want us, instead of spending a ridiculous amount of time discussing a lot of this, if you look at tables 1A and 2A, and you look at the recommendation at the bottom, if you look at those percentages, there is not a significant amount of difference between 1A and 2A. So I would frankly say it's irrelevant, so let's not spend a lot of time on that. I think the more important question is, do we want to include all monies or just the DRCOG monies? And you know, and can I make a motion at that point to use Table 2B?
Okay.
Second.
All right. So we have a motion before the group to adopt Table 2B as the one to go with, and I have a second from, who did I hear second? Phil. I have a second from Phil, and I have a comment from staff, and then I'll recognize Chris.
Thank you, sir, very much. I just wanted to clarify that, you know, the motion that's on the floor, I hope relates to the variables that are used in the calculation of tables 2A and 2B, because this table itself is for draft, just for discussion purposes. I would suggest to you that this will change, albeit marginally, but it will. It's a fluid table. We update this. So I just wanted to make sure that everybody was aware of that when you get this table back in
So noted.
January, it may not have the exact same numbers, but they'll be very close.
That's a very appropriate clarification to make. It's the construct that we would be approving in 2B, not the specific numbers, because obviously as new information comes in, and staff identified that in the memo, saying obviously this doesn't take into account things that will be approved in the first phase of the TIP and so forth. So on the motion, 2A and 2B, Chris, you were next.
Thank you. Actually, I hope, I mean, if we have a motion, we have a motion. I'd speak against it because I don't think we're ready for prime time. I don't think we're ready to make a decision here. I think there's more discussion both of the factors and of the way the factors interact with each other that we need to have. So I don't want us to be too precipitous in choosing one thing over another before we've sort of thought through what we're doing. To that end, my comment a minute ago was, you know, I sort of said by way of preamble, this is in the parochial interest of Denver to have a rolling calculation rather than one that has a permanent fixed point, because we'll get screwed by T-Rex forever. This comment is much more on the bigger, are we doing the right thing frame, and frankly this is against Denver's parochial interests, but I don't think we should take out CDOT and RTD spending, and in fact I think this has been bothering me for a while. The way this ratio is conceived is kind of goofy. So I mean, it's a contribution to the community versus spending on transportation in the community. I mean, that makes a certain amount of logical sense. Like, you know, are you getting your fair share? But explain to me how the number of people living in your community is a contribution to transportation spending. Explain to me how VMT is a contribution to anything other than the problem. I mean, I don't get that side of the equation as conceived of contribution versus expenditure. And trying to rethink this, I was thinking the way this ought to be put together is what is the demand on the transportation system that your jurisdiction represents? What's the demand? And then on the other side of the equation is how much money has been spent to meet that demand. So Denver represents a huge demand on the transportation system. Roads, transit, bicycles, everything. And a shitload of money has been spent to meet that demand in Denver too. And that includes CDOT money, that includes RTD money. Frankly, that includes Highway User Trust Fund disbursements. That's money that comes to Denver that's meant to be spent on transportation, and we spend it to meet the transportation demand in Denver. So I'd argue for kind of a rethinking of this, that it's a calculation of the ratio of how much demand is a county generating for the transportation system versus how much money is being expended to meet that demand.
Thank you. And I'll recognize Elise and then Bill, and then I have a comment. Elise, Commissioner?
I want to piggyback on what Chris just said, because it seems like with equity, not only do you want to make sure there's that we spread the peanut butter a little bit to everybody, I get that, but by and large you want to reward the solutions, the things that are meeting MetroVision goals, that are reducing traffic and air emissions and VMT and SOV, and some of these parameters under the quote-unquote contributions, and at a minimum we got to get a new name because it's not contribution.
Right.
But so the bigger VMT you have, I mean, you're almost getting rewarded for having the worst traffic, and that's an odd thing to reward when we're actually trying to decrease VMT. So I think it's not an intuitive setup that we have here. I was also going to put in a plug, because we do have a motion on the table, that DRCOG is a regional body, and the sets of money, even though they're much smaller than we'd like them to be, that go into the transportation system are from different entities. And for us just to calculate equity based on what we have control over without having it in the context of the larger transportation system it doesn't seem to strike the right regional tone in terms of how we're looking at this. So I guess on first blush, I'm not inclined to support the motion.
And then Commissioner Holland. Bill.
From Arapahoe County's perspective, we support the motion on the floor. I think the issue about equity is a very important one. I agree with Elise, but I think the point being that by not taking beneficial opportunity, I would call it, in terms of funding, the floods up in Boulder County would have an impact on your numbers, I would suspect. You already mentioned in Denver the E4, the impact of significant improvements on I-25 will be a factor. I think it's more important to look at what we have in the pot, make our decisions based upon that, and the other operational criteria that's been presented.
And I'm going to recognize myself in a minute, but first I'm going to recognize the others who have not spoken and who have indicated they'd like to speak. So first, Shakti.
At the last meeting, I was the one who brought up the vehicle miles traveled, and I've been talking to our staff, and my understanding is that the role vehicle miles traveled is supposed to play in this calculation is not to say how much people are driving. It's a proxy of how much money is being collected. So, and it relates to some tax I'm not clear on the details. I think you can go over here for the details. But the way he was presenting it to me is that this is sort of the simple calculation of how much money do people put in and how much money have they gotten out. And the different, I don't know how population fits in, but the different factors really go to that. And I feel like there needs to be a way to also be looking at the quality of the projects. So it's important that we at least look at the phase 1 numbers. But I also, my head hurts a little bit when we try to ask those questions about what is a good project in the second phase when that's what we were doing in the first phase to some extent. So.
Thank you, Shakti. And then Ashley from Louisville.
Yeah, so I find it really useful when looking at developing criteria to try to come up with criteria that are made up of independent variables, and I think that's where I struggle with some of the things in the contribution side. For me, VMT is dependent on population and employment, and so you sort of have these things counted. We also have very small communities, which is dependent on population. So we're not ranking them, so it makes me feel a little bit better because we can sort of just weigh the things separately. But we're really counting things time and again, and I think if we just sort of peeled back and looked at what are the fundamental factors that we're trying to rank, and then just weigh those factors rather than necessarily make these ratios, I think it might be a little bit easier.
And then I had, Phil, you had your hand up next, and then I have Val, and then Jackie after that.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Wanted to actually respond a little bit to Councilmember Nevitt's point about, and Commissioner Jones, on the contribution side. One of the things, as I look at the contribution side, it represents both demand and opportunity. So when we're talking about vehicle miles traveled, particularly with Commissioner Jones's comments, this is one of the criteria that will have an element of ranking on a relative scale, plus or minus, over or under. And it says, geez, where we have a lot of vehicles miles traveled, maybe that gives us a great opportunity for reduction of that. And so as we take a look at the contribution, that says, hey, here's where we have a greater opportunity. It's also where people happen to be, and it's going to be a relative item just in that criteria. We're not ranking it solely, but this is dealing with that one characteristic of equity components. And then on the dollars spent, certainly taking a look at DRCOG is what we as this board or as a subcommittee of that board have a chance to influence. There's a lot of other things that could throw things off, like how many federal dollars do you receive? Well, that's only large communities that have a chance to get federal dollars on that, and so that would skew things a little bit more in various different directions, because those dollars can be used for multitudes of projects, including transportation, whereas this only takes some components of that in the 1A, or excuse me, in the 1B option. So it's kind of trying to take a look at, hey, let's keep it a little bit closer to home, because that's the equity component I think we're trying to deal with. So, thank you.
And first I have Val, then Jackie, then Anthony. Val?
Oh, thank you, Mr. Chairman. I guess I'd like to be able to go back and revisit the reason why we have a 75-25 break to begin with. The way I see it, and if I remember correctly, the conversations we had, again, were that we're not quite sure that our TIP process, our criteria process, is 100% proof. And so we've decided we'll take 75% of our pool and go that route on the scoring method. And then use the other 25% to kind of go back and double check on ourselves to make sure that everybody got a fair share and that our scoring method was wrong, okay, or was off. And I'm not saying that we can come up with 100% proof on that scoring. It's just too many variables on that. And so that is my understanding of why we have that extra 25%. Having said that, then this 25% is to go back and correct our actions on our money that we had, not to go back and try to build an equity on CDOT's spending and their decisions of where they spend their money, or RTD, or anybody else, but us, the money that DRCOG came through DRCOG. So therefore, you know, I speak in favor of the motion that we should end up in here, and I tell you that Adams County, going with this method, Adams County is worse off than the other method, but I think it's the right thing to do so that we can know how we control our spending money. So let's go back and reflect why we have a 75-25 to begin with.
Thank you, Val. Appreciate that. Jackie. Okay. And no, but Anthony was next. Then I'll recognize Chris, and then I'll make a comment.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. First, I'd actually like to recognize staff for the work that they've put into this construct. As they've stated publicly, it's been a very daunting and difficult task, and I do not envy you having to kind of crunch these numbers behind the scenes. But to that point, there are so many open questions that while we're closer, I think, to addressing this, I'll also be speaking and voting against this as well. There's still a number of questions I have as well about attribution. Chris and Jackie brought up questions of major projects and how they impact the equity formula for our various jurisdictions. Denver Union Station comes to mind. You know, I have a number of questions about how we dealt with that, the equity calculation, you know, exactly how we got the attribution for Denver, and it's fairly weighty. And so I'll be speaking against the motion for those reasons. Thank you.
Thank you, Anthony. Chris.
Thank you. I think I need to clarify a little bit when, in sort of response to Mayor Cernanek, I'm not arguing that VMT shouldn't be a factor in consideration on one side of the equation. I'm just, I'm trying to get us to reject the contribution versus benefit formulation, and remember, we're not bound in some sort of, you know, robotic way to what the numbers produce. I mean, Denver is, you know, traditionally well over equity, and you know, we still get projects funded, so we're making our own judgments. But I'm trying to have I want us to have a number that is meaningful, and even though, you know, what staff has done is excellent and an improvement, I don't think this number, this ratio, means anything. It doesn't tell us anything. I mean, if I were to say, what are the factors on the different sides of the equation, I'd say, well, one side is the demand, the other side is what we're spending to meet that demand. What does demand consist of? Well, it consists of population. The more population, the more demand, right? It's there. Employment. Check. Right? So how many people are working there, right? Makes sense. VMT, absolutely. I mean, we spend a ton of money on road projects, so you know, that's clearly a measure of demand on the transportation system. But also, we need to measure some, I mean, we spend money on transit projects. We spend money on bicycle projects. We need to have a way of counting that demand as well. So population, employment, VMT, and some kind of, you know, alternative transportation demand. That's the demand side. And then on the expenditure to meet the demand side is, I think, CDOT, RTD, DRCOG certainly, and the Highway User Trust Fund disbursements. I mean, that's all, and that will tell us, again, we don't have to be, you know, slaves to the number, but that will actually tell us on a county by county basis some sense of what is the transportation demand in that county and how much has been spent from a variety of sources, how much has been spent to meet that demand. Then when we get into our project disbursements, the 25%, we can look at that and say, wow, this is a community that, you know, has a lot of demand and they haven't gotten a lot of projects. So here on the DRCOG side, we should give them money for their projects to fix that equity disequilibrium. But I think our number has to be meaningful. Our number has to tell us something, and right now it doesn't tell us anything. It's just a bunch of crap on one side of the equation and a bunch of crap on the other side of the equation. We're picking and choosing, right? Right, and then it produces a percentage, and then, you know, we point to each other and say over, under, over, under. It's kind of meaningless. I want it to mean something, even though this is arguing against Denver's parochial interests. I think we should have a meaningful number.
I'm going to make a comment, and then I have Ron, Jackie, and George. And the first thing I want to do is remember, all of us, please, that we're the ones actually who asked staff to come up with this information. We said, well, tell us what the equities are in terms of the funding. So now we say, well, but you came up with all this information. We asked for this, and we said we want to have some picture of it. And I think Val put it very well when he talked about, what's the reason for the 25% pot. And I talked earlier about the gut equity. To some extent, we should remind ourselves that this is art masquerading as science. And that's okay. That's not a bad thing. That's not a condemnation. What we're trying to do is say we have an artful decision that we have to make with the 25% left over, but we'd like to have some sense that we've been considered and considerate in doing that determination. And so we want some information. And the motion that is on the table before us that we're discussing is, well, if we're going to do that, then let's pick Table 2B as opposed to Table 1B. And the reason I would support the motion personally is that I think all of the other factors that we're discussing are a part of that consideration anyway, because it is, and in the nicest way possible, I mean this really as a compliment, it's art masquerading as science. It is an artful process in which we are engaged. I have Ron, Jackie, and George. Mayor Rakowski.
Mr. Chairman, I call the question.
Question has been called, which means that we will proceed to a vote on the motion at this time. And I'm so happy it was...
On the question.
Pardon now?
Your vote would be...
Yeah, we're going to vote on the question. I'm just so happy that it was Mayor Rakowski who cut off Jackie and not me. I was ready to do it. Okay. All those in favor of proceeding to an immediate vote, please indicate by raising your hands. Those opposed? The chair rules that the ayes have it. The question has been called. We proceed to a vote now on the question, and the question as presented is the adoption of Table 2B as the recommendation of MVIC for the county equity funding status and ratio chart. Point of order from Mayor Cernanek.
Point of order, just note that it is the construct represented in Table 2B.
In very valid and important point, as staff pointed out. It's the construct, i.e. it is the design, the elements, and the various identifications of counties, not the specific numbers. An inquiry?
Just a question. Along Cernanek's line, the weights for the particular factors are not determined here either, are they, or are they? I'm just trying to figure out what we're nailing down and what remains plastic.
That's right.
Unless there is huge objection, I do have a parliamentarian point there that the question is really technically out of order, but do you have a quick response?
Yes, the variables are weighted equally.
Okay.
Equal.
Okay, thank you. All right.
At this point, we'll proceed to the vote on the motion, which is to adopt the construct as represented in Table 2B. All those in favor?
Actually, is the point, it's 2A and 2B.
Well, yeah.
Okay, well, you just kept saying 2B. My motion was for,
I'm sorry, yes, I keep saying 2B because 1A and 2B are substantive equivalents, and that I appreciate the correction on that point, though. Thank you very much. So it's the table 2A, 2B construct as opposed to the table 1A, 1B construct. All those in favor of the motion to adopt tables 2A, 2B construct, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? All right, let's see a show of hands just to do it this way. All those in favor, please indicate by raising your hands. And all those opposed, please raise your hands. We have 6 opposed. Okay. All right. On a vote of 12 to 6, that motion passes. That does, again, to back up and reflect upon this, we have 6 factors that staff has recommended. We have addressed one element of one of the factors. Now we yes, and it's 5:20, and we did all that. No, we've accomplished a lot because we've also fleshed out a number of these other factors. But the discussion now is on the overall list of factors, and one issue that has come up has been, should we in fact add in as a 7th factor the last mile discussion that we were having. Anything else is open. There are no motions pending on the table. This is discussion on the criteria, but I would suggest that if we could try to focus in on where we find controversy, that might be good and we could clear that up. Mayor Atchison, Herb.
Just kind of following up with what Chris brought up, and I think many of us have so far, I think we need a clear definition of what is last mile, because right now it's hard for us to make a determination on the vote for or against when you don't know what it is. So my recommendation is that that would stay as a future recommendation to be added to the staff recommendation, but not to close that out, because right now I don't know how to vote if I don't know what I'm voting for.
And I have Elise and then George and Anthony.
I was going to put a motion on the table that we direct staff to look at the first last mile question and come back with a proposal around how to define it.
And that's a motion to direct that issue to staff for provision of a definition of first last mile that could be included in these
as a summit
factors as consideration. And I have a second from Mayor Atchison on that. And before I recognize anyone else, let me ask, do you want to speak to your motion, Elise?
Well, we've already said quite a bit about it. I think I would add to it that historically in Phase 2, bike ped projects have been favored heavily because they, and they are some of the types of the projects that would fall under first and last mile criteria, because they work in all communities. They're very popular. It's, as we recall from the failed MPAC 64 polling, that is the one thing that people agreed on across the state was the importance of those types of projects. So I think it makes sense for us to have further exploration. Again, I think we should remind ourselves as we do this exploration, it's not a binding requirement. It's just saying that these types of projects, if we can define them for consideration, are particularly important and help, I think it's Tim mentioned, leverage our investment in transit, as well as meet the heavy demand for bike ped projects that we've seen historically.
Thank you. And George, you were next, but if your discussion is not germane to the motion that now is to refer the matter back to staff to define first last mile, I'm going to ask you to defer because we have to stay focused on the motion that's on the floor right now. Did you want to speak to the motion?
Yes, actually, I'll briefly speak to the motion and speak in favor of the motion, and actually just echoing Herb's comment of, I don't know how to vote. I mean, we need that definition. At very least, I need it.
And then Anthony, and I have Jackie after Anthony.
This speaks to the motion as well, actually. Just had a point of inquiry, and this is directed to staff. They noted that Phase 1 sort of covers first and last mile, and so I was wondering if they might elaborate and explain how it does. And speaking to the motion, thank you.
And I think it's a fair question, and we can ask staff at this time, because it is germane to the motion, to address that. Then I have Jackie, and then I have Bill.
I was going to make that exact point, is to have it, I want to have an understanding of how many points have been or potentially awarded in the first phase for first and last mile connections, in addition to how they are defined, and in the context of are there elements of some of the projects that solve the last mile, that they may not be there solely for the purpose of a first last mile connection, but they solve the first last mile connection, and how is that considered in the first phase as well? So, and I don't know if you can answer that, but but as you go back and look at it, the more information you could provide to us on the whole topic, not just the definition of it, but really how it's handled in the first phase scoring as well.
Sure, no,
That
definitely.
actually sounds like a comment in favor of the motion to send this back to staff for further definition. But I will ask staff if you have a response you can make now to Anthony's question, if you want to. Otherwise, we can see how the motion goes, and you may be speaking more to us next month.
Yeah, real quickly, you know, Anthony, I think what the memo says itself, we felt that it was, well, I better say exactly what we said. That it adequately was reflected in there. We didn't say it certainly didn't totally cover first last mile projects. I mean, in particular, you know, the projects that, and Elise spoke to this, it's really bike ped projects and transit to some degree. I mean, if you could, in transit, for example, could be some kind of feeder system from, let's just, for example, a light rail station to some facility. It could be like a little transit feeder to some facility, for example. That could be a first last mile improvement. You know, with regards to bike ped, there are specific criteria within the first phase that speaks directly to that. One in particular is, I just had it. Here it is. Well, there's a connectivity criteria within bike ped, and it speaks to there's points given for access, up to 4 points for a bike ped facility that directly touches a school property. That's 4 points. 3 points it directly touches an employment center, greater than 2,000 jobs. 2 points for a facility directly serving a destination such as employment, what have you. So those are points directly associated with first last mile. There's also up to 6 points are given to bike ped projects that provide first last mile improvements to transit that directly provide direct access to transit. So, you know, so there is specific information within first phase itself.
Then I had Commissioner Holen. Bill?
I request that we move the question.
We have a call for the question. Would all of those in favor of stopping debate on the motion to refer this matter back to the matter relative to first last mile as an additional consideration back to staff for definition and report back to us at the next meeting? Would all those in favor of calling the question please indicate by saying aye?
Aye.
Are there any opposed? There's one opposed. That passes pretty darn near unanimously. Then we turn to the motion itself, which was Commissioner Jones' motion to refer the matter back to staff relative to providing a definition for first, last mile and creating metrics that we can use to see whether that can be included as an additional consideration in the staff recommendation for factors for the second phase. Have I correctly summarized your motion? Having done so, all those in favor of the motion, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? That one passes unanimously. So we have Mayor Cernanek.
I have a motion.
Please.
And we'll look for the opportunity to speak to the motion, but in the interest of time, Move to recommend that the Board of Directors' second phase project selection criteria for development of the 2016-21 Transportation Improvement Program include items 1 through 6, leaving a column for the connectivity, and the last for consideration at a future date would be included as well. Looking for a second.
We have a motion by Mayor Cernanek and a second by Mayor Atchison, and Mayor Cernanek asked to speak to the motion.
Yes, I think we've talked a lot about the criteria, and one of the things that we will also have is some consideration as we talk about the bike ped projects is there's a higher percentage of phase 1 project dollars that are actually allocated to that as a specific criteria. So that will be one of the items that we have out there. But the other 6 criteria are not actually leading to a ranking, but are leading to information for consideration in phase 2. It gives us an opportunity to take a look at those. The other criteria that have been mentioned either will require a lot more work or a lot more analysis or time to transpire. So I think that we have a pretty good set of criteria to consider in phase 2, and as the chairman here has represented, it is art masquerading as science. There will be significant discussions when it gets to phase 2. We will not go by that.
Thank you. I have a question I'd like to pose to staff to make sure we understand the timing and the impact of the motion and creating, in effect, a TBD column at the end based upon first last mile. This is tentatively set for the agenda for the full board meeting on September 17th, 2 weeks from today. We could easily present to the board the 6 factors and point out that they are not rank ordered, they are not priority, they're not weighted, they are 6 factors, with the statement that we are also then looking at the possibility of adding a 7th. And we could do that on the 17th. Or we could defer the entire discussion to the October board meeting. But the question to staff is this a time-sensitive matter? Do we need to proceed at least as far as we can now, or could we defer? And then we'll ask the pleasure of the group, obviously. But I want to get staff's determination of if it's time-sensitive.
No, it's not time sensitive. I mean, ultimately, you know, we're going to have that second phase discussion in January, so we still have time. You know, and quite frankly, I think I'd feel uncomfortable taking it to the board without that determination on the first last mile recommendation from you all. So if defer would be our recommendation.
So as I understand it from staff, if we were to adopt the motion, in effect, we'd be telling the board on the 17th, we have these 6 and we're still thinking about a 7th one, and I'm wondering whether the mayor would have a thought on that.
I did not put a time frame on when we would have to carry it to the board, so it can be taken in the October meeting. It's just, I think we've discussed it enough, and looking for the sentiment of the body to see whether we can actually move forward and focus our future discussions rather than having to rehash what we've done this evening.
So as I understand the motion, it's that we could approve the 6 factors at this time, leaving open the consideration of a 7th factor, all of which would be determined by us at our October 1st meeting of MBIC, and then be in a position to report back to the board on October the 15th. As I understand the motion. And is that the motion, does the second to the motion agree with that understanding?
I have no problem with it. I do have a question, though, as you pointed out from staff. Can you come back with a definition in time?
Yes, sir.
Because I don't want you to just go throw something together, because we need to make sure we all understand and can come to an agreement on what is going to be the definition of last mile.
Right, no.
And if that's going to take more time, I would rather spend the more time than have it have to be repeated.
Right. No, I appreciate that, but we feel that's a comfortable amount of time for us to come up with, and indeed provide you with options. And
Just remember, you said it. So
yes, I know.
Although I did not see Connie write it down, so it may never have happened. Mayor Pro Tem Millet.
Thank you, Nancy Millay. In the discussion of the definition of last mile, I really do think it's important to also have an understanding of how it has been incorporated in phase one as well, because I really don't like this idea of double counting. So could we please make sure that information is presented to the board? Okay. And then the other thing I'd like to throw out to the group is, in my review of 1 through 6, recognizing they're in no particular order, some of them are more important to me than others. And in the idea of kind of having just a sense from the group, are some of these kind of a higher priority consideration versus a lower priority? Again, not that I want to muddy the waters, but I would like the board members here to start thinking about that. For example, the number of sponsor projects selected in first phase or multi-jurisdictional projects, do we value that at the same level we value small communities and equity issues? So I'm not looking to make a motion. I just want the group to start considering that as well in the context of second phase, that these are not all going to, so if everything gets a check, are we going to revert back to tip criteria score to decide which projects get funded? I don't think so. So keep that in mind as we move forward in this process.
Right. Further discussion on the motion. Mayor Cernanek's motion relates to the adoption of the 6 factors that you see. And as Mayor Pro Tem Millet points out, they're not weighted, they're not ranked, they're not prioritized. We may, as we go forward with the second phase, want to consider that. But right now, it's just these are the factors. And with the understanding that the 7th possible factor will then be discussed at the October 1 meeting. So further discussion on the motion. Seeing none, I believe the chair finds it appropriate to put the motion to a vote. All those in favor of the motion by Mayor Cernanek, please indicate by saying aye.
Aye.
Are there any opposed? Hearing none, that motion passes unanimously. We turn to agenda item number 5, other matters. Are there any other matters from the executive director or from staff or from any member of MBEC to bring before the committee at this time? Seeing none, our next meeting will be on October the 1st, 2014, same time, same place, and as of 5:35 p.m., the chair rules the meeting is adjourned. Thank you all.
Connie, can my alternate come to MVIC? Can my alternate come to MVIC?